Opening hook. Have you ever poured your heart into someone, offered patience, kindness, and sincerity, only to be met with coldness, suspicion, or even hostility? You came with no hidden agenda, yet somehow your light seemed to trigger something dark in them, and you're left wondering. Transition to Stoic frame. The Stoics, those ancient masters of resilience, taught us something timeless. We are not disturbed by things, but by our judgments about them. Think about that for a moment. The problem isn't always what people do or say, it's how we interpret it. And sometimes, the harshest judgments aren't even spoken aloud. They're carried quietly, buried in someone's heart, triggered by the very light you carry. Reflection, question. So here's the real question. What if their reaction to your kindness has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them? Explaining the dynamic. You see, when you show up with patience in a world addicted to impatience, when you extend forgiveness where others hold grudges, your actions don't just exist in a vacuum. They contrast, they shine a spotlight. And for some people, that contrast feels threatening. Your calm presence unsettles their chaos. Your honesty challenges their deception. Your peace exposes the storm they're still trapped in. It's not about blame, it's about clarity. Because once you understand this dynamic, you stop carrying the unnecessary burden of thinking, maybe I'm the problem. Illustrative example. Let me give you a picture. Imagine you walk into a room where everyone is gossiping, competing, feeding off drama. And instead of joining in, you simply sit quietly, focused, calm. You don't scold anyone. You don't make a speech about virtue. But suddenly the air shifts. It's not that you did something wrong. It's that your stillness, your refusal to join the noise, becomes a mirror. And many people would rather shatter the mirror than face their reflection. Personal perspective. I've felt this in my own life. Times when I thought I was building bridges with kindness, only to realize some people weren't ready to cross them. And for a while it hurt. I thought maybe my kindness was weakness. Maybe my patience was naivety. But over time, I began to see what the Stoics meant. The disturbance was never about me. It was about the judgments and wounds others carried inside, deepening the message. And here's the paradox. Your goodness doesn't always attract gratitude, it can ignite resistance. Why? Because it reminds people of a truth they've abandoned. When Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury," he was pointing to something profound. Sometimes, just by being unlike them, calm instead of chaotic, forgiving instead of bitter, you unintentionally reveal the choices they've made, and that revelation can sting. Reframing for the viewer. So if you've ever been rejected for being genuine, ignored for being patient, or even attacked for being kind, don't rush to blame yourself. Don't think, "I should stop being this way." Instead, realize this. Your way of being has touched a nerve. You've exposed a wound, and that discomfort belongs to them, not to you. Bridge to the rest of the video. This video isn't about teaching you to shut down your kindness. It's about learning how to walk through these hidden fires without burning yourself. How to remain whole when others project their brokenness onto you. Because if your kindness unsettles them, let it. You are not here to mirror their turmoil. You're here to stay aligned with your own clarity, your own integrity. Closing the opening, so stay with me. Because in the next part, we'll dive deeper into why your presence sometimes provokes resistance and how Stoic wisdom can guide you to stand firm, not bitter, not defensive, but steady, calm, and free. Opening question. Have you ever wondered why your calmness seems to unsettle others? Why your kindness, instead of being welcomed, sometimes invites suspicion, resistance, or even hostility? You forgive when others hold grudges. You listen when others shout, and you remain patient when anger rises around you. Yet instead of appreciation, you're met with cold stares or cutting words. Why does it feel like doing the right thing provokes the wrong reaction? Stoic frame. The Stoics would tell us this. When you live in harmony with nature, with reason, with virtue, with peace, You become a living contrast to those who are still enslaved by chaos, passion, and wounds they've never examined. And that contrast doesn't always soothe people. Sometimes it exposes them. Illustrative example. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." But what happens when simply being unlike them is enough to make them feel injured? Imagine Elias, a quiet, steady soul in a noisy workplace. He never gossiped, never competed, never raised his voice. When someone made a mistake, he offered help without shaming them. While others argued to look important, he just did his job with precision and grace. For a while, people didn't know what to do with him. Some admired him, others ignored him. But slowly, whispers began. He's fake. He thinks he's better than us. Elias never claimed to be perfect. He just refused to act out of fear or anger. And that alone was enough to trigger resentment. Reflection point. Why? Because Elias's peace acted like a mirror. It reflected back the noise, insecurity, and ego others carried. And many would rather shatter the mirror than face their own reflection. Deepening the lesson. This is the unseen burden of virtue. When you walk the high road, you force others to notice that they've chosen the low one. When you stay calm, you remind others of their lack of control. When you forgive, you highlight their bitterness. And when you remain honest, you expose their manipulation. To those still ruled by resentment, forgiveness feels like judgment. To those addicted to drama, your silence feels like superiority. To those hiding behind deception, your honesty feels like danger. It's not that you're attacking them, it's that your way of being reveals something they would rather not see. Personal perspective. I've lived this, and maybe you have too. Times when someone misread your intentions, when your kindness was twisted into something suspicious. And at first you question yourself, am I doing something wrong? Am I naive? But what Stoicism teaches us is liberating. The problem isn't that you're wrong, it's that you're not joining them in doing wrong. Practical wisdom. Marcus Aurelius offered a powerful reminder. If someone shows me that what I think or do is not right, I will gladly change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed. That's the key difference. The Stoic doesn't cling to stubborn pride. He's willing to change when truth demands it, but he won't bend just to appease someone else's chaos. Application to daily life. So what do you do when your kindness triggers another's turmoil? You stay kind but not blind. You stay patient but not passive. You stay firm in your principles, but you don't shrink just to make others comfortable. You realize that not all attacks are personal. When someone is at war with themselves, they may see your peace as betrayal. Think about the last time someone accused you of being too quiet, or too nice, or too calm. Was that really about you? Or was it about their discomfort with what they haven't found inside themselves? Closing the part. The Stoic path reminds us, your job is not to absorb their conflict. Your role is not to internalize their chaos. Your task is to remain centered in your own integrity. Because in the end, your presence alone, rooted in clarity, compassion, and principle, is enough to reveal truths that words never could. So when they whisper behind your back, when they question your motives, when they lash out at your calm, remember this. And what they do with that revelation is their burden, not yours. Opening reflection. Have you ever been told you're too real? As if your honesty made people uncomfortable? As if your refusal to play along somehow offended them? You didn't yell, you didn't argue, you simply showed up as yourself without pretending, without performance. And yet, the room shifted. Some pulled away, some grew defensive, not because you did anything wrong, but because you did something rare. You chose not to wear the mask they still depend on. Stoic frame. The Stoics taught that to live in alignment with nature is to live without disguise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." But think about what that really means in a world obsessed with image, with social armor, with carefully crafted personas. To live truthfully without disguise is not just uncommon, it's disruptive. Because when you remove your mask, you don't just reveal yourself, you reveal the falsehood of others. Illustrative example. Let me tell you about Claire. She worked in a corporate office where appearances meant everything. Smiles were polished, compliments were rehearsed, and truth was often the first casualty of team culture. Claire didn't play the game. She didn't gossip. She didn't nod along to lies just to blend in. She did her work with quiet integrity. When asked her opinion, she gave it clearly, not harshly, just truthfully. And people didn't know what to do with her. Some called her cold. Others whispered she lacked people skills. But the real reason? Her honesty exposed their performance. Reflection point. Isn't it interesting how authenticity can be misread as arrogance? How sincerity is sometimes treated as a threat? The paradox is that by refusing to perform, you become a mirror. Not one that flatters, but one that reflects reality. And for those who've built their identity on illusion, that reflection feels unbearable. Personal perspective. Maybe you've experienced this. I know I have. Times when speaking plainly, without sugarcoating, without trying to impress, earned me distance instead of connection. At first I thought, maybe I should tone it down. Maybe honesty really is too much. But the more I studied Stoic thought, the clearer it became. People aren't rejecting you. They're rejecting the part of themselves they see in your truth, deepening the lesson. Epictetus once warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Why? Because the moment you shed the act, people will misunderstand you. They'll label you blunt, naive, idealistic. But beneath those labels is something deeper. Your authenticity makes them question the roles they play. And rather than face that discomfort, they push you away. Application to daily life. So how do we live with this? By remembering what the Stoics knew well. You are not here to collect applause. You are here to live in accordance with reason and virtue. That means staying rooted in who you are, even when it costs you acceptance. It means letting go of the need to be liked in order to stay true. Think about this. If the price of belonging is your authenticity, is that really belonging or is it bondage? Practical wisdom. Here's the truth. The world doesn't need more actors. It doesn't need more masks. It needs people willing to be seen calm, real, unwavering. Some will criticize your honesty, but their discomfort is not your failure. It's their invitation to examine the life they're living. And whether they take that invitation or not, that's not your responsibility. Closing the part, so if people distance themselves when you drop the mask, let them. If they call your truth cold or your integrity arrogant, let them. Because the Stoic doesn't live for approval. He lives in alignment. And when you carry yourself that way, when your words match your values and your actions reflect your convictions, you don't just disturb what's false, you awaken what's true. That's the power of authenticity. It doesn't always win you friends, but it will always win you freedom. Opening question. Have you ever decided to make a small change, wake up earlier, cut back on negativity, choose silence over drama, and suddenly noticed how the people around you shifted? Instead of cheering you on, they teased you, pulled away, or treated you like you'd done something wrong. You didn't harm them, you just grew. And somehow, that was enough to make them uncomfortable. Stoic frame. This is one of the most painful truths about growth. Not everyone will celebrate it. In fact, many will resist it. Why? Because your growth becomes a mirror, reflecting their stagnation. The Stoics understood this well. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." When you stop wasting yours, when you start refining your habits and walking with intention, if you don't just change yourself, you change the dynamics of every relationship that depended on the old you. Illustrative example. Take Julian, for example. For years, he lived on autopilot. He stayed in toxic circles, laughed at jokes that didn't match his values, drank more than he wanted, and never questioned the script he was handed. Then, something shifted. Maybe it was the death of his father. Maybe it was the quiet ache of a life unlived. One day he stopped making excuses. He deleted the apps. He opened Epictetus instead of scrolling arguments online. He spoke less, listened more. At first his friends applauded him. "Good for you," they said. But soon discomfort crept in. They missed the old Julian, the one who overreacted, who gossiped, who joined them in their distractions. And when he no longer did, they mocked him. "You're boring now. You think you're better than us." But Julian didn't react. He just kept growing. And with every step forward, the gap widened. Not because he pushed them away, but because they refused to move forward. Reflection point. Have you felt that gap in your own life? The subtle coldness when you break a pattern? The awkward silence when you stop joining in the gossip or the complaints? It's not betrayal, it's reality. Some relationships are built not on shared strength, but on shared weakness. And the moment you step outside of that weakness, you disrupt the unspoken contract. Personal perspective. I've felt this myself. Times when I thought people would be proud of my growth, only to find them irritated instead. And at first, I blamed myself. Maybe I should slow down. But the Stoics helped me see clearly. You are not responsible for another person's decision to stay stuck. Epictetus said, "You are not disturbed by events, but by your opinion about events." The same applies to people. You're not responsible for how they feel about your growth. Deepening the lesson. Growth is a quiet confrontation. When you evolve, you show others that they too could change, but haven't. When you heal, you reveal their wounds. When you live with discipline, you highlight their excuses. And rather than rise with you, many would rather pull you back. That's why your evolution often costs you people. But that cost is not cruelty, it's clarity. You're not being rejected, you're being released. Released from those who only knew how to relate to the weaker version of you. Released from circles that fed on your stagnation. Application to daily life. So what do you do when your growth unsettles those around you? You stay the course. You don't argue. You don't beg to be understood. Because your role is not to convince others to grow with you. Your role is to grow so clearly, so steadily, that those who are meant to rise will find the courage to follow. Not because you pulled them, but because you showed them it was possible. Practical wisdom. Ask yourself, if I dim my light to keep others comfortable, what do I lose? If I shrink my growth just to fit back into the old version of me, who am I betraying? The answer is always the same: you betray yourself. And self-betrayal is a cost far greater than losing a few relationships. Closing the part. Your growth is not a betrayal. It is a return. A return to your true nature, to reason, to discipline, to peace. And if that makes others uncomfortable, let it. Not because you wish them harm. So when you feel the sting of distance, the coldness of old friends, remember this: they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the reflection your growth has shown them. And that is their burden to face, not yours. Stay the course. Keep rising, because the world doesn't need another version of who you were yesterday. It needs the fullest version of who you are becoming. Opening question. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the energy shift, not because you said anything, not because you did anything dramatic, but simply because you carried yourself differently? You didn't laugh at what wasn't funny. You didn't nod just to agree. You didn't echo the outrage everyone else was feeding on. You simply stood your ground, calm, steady, detached, and suddenly you became the problem. Stoic frame. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Your independence can unsettle people more than an insult ever could. Why? Because your refusal to join the collective noise threatens something primal: the herd instinct, the ancient pull to conform, to belong, to follow the crowd even when the crowd is running in the wrong direction. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius warned us, The approval of the multitude is a poor standard, for often they praise what is popular, not what is right. The rule, when you live by principle rather than popularity, you stop being one of them. And to the herd, that makes you a threat. Illustrative example. Let's take Theron. He worked in an office where gossip was currency. People bonded by mocking others, by sharing outrage, by trading in negativity. Theron didn't join in not because he thought he was better, but because he was deliberate. He'd seen what mindless agreement could do to a person's soul, so he listened without reacting. He walked away when the talk turned sour. At first they ignored him. Before long, Theron became the outcast not because he attacked anyone, but because he didn't align with what everyone else had normalized. Reflection point, have you ever been in that position? Standing apart, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect, and suddenly people accuse you of being cold, distant, or self-righteous? It's not really about you. It's about the silent confrontation your presence creates. When you no longer dance to the rhythm of the herd, you remind others of their own silence, their own doubts, their own lack of clarity. Personal perspective. I've seen this in my own life. Times when choosing stillness over noise, calm over chaos, instantly shifted how others treated me. They didn't say it out loud, but I could feel it. My refusal to join the emotional stampede unsettled them. And it took me a while to understand that this wasn't a failure, it was proof that I was walking a different path. Deepening the lesson. Epictetus gave us this warning. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish. Foolish, arrogant, cold, disconnected, these are the labels people throw when you stop playing by the rules of the crowd. But what they're really saying is, you make me question why I'm still following. And that is the silent power of disrupting the herd. You don't have to criticize. You don't have to challenge. You simply have to stop conforming. Application to daily life. So what do you do when your independence makes others uneasy? You accept it. You let them whisper. You let them misunderstand. Because the Stoic knows true strength isn't measured by how many agree with you, but by how firmly you can live without needing their agreement. Think about it. The herd moves by fear, fear of exclusion, fear of rejection, fear of standing alone. But the Stoic walks with reason, not fear. And in that walk, there is a different kind of safety, the safety of knowing you haven't abandoned yourself. Practical wisdom. Ask yourself, do I want to belong because I am truly aligned, or do I just want to avoid standing alone? Because here's the paradox. The more you cling to the herd for safety, the more you lose your own direction. But the moment you choose clarity over conformity, you begin to walk with truth. And yes, people may resent you for it. They may feel betrayed, but you're not betraying them. You're refusing to betray yourself. Closing the part. So let them talk. Let them label you arrogant, aloof, foolish. Their discomfort is not your burden. What matters is this. You are not here to mirror the crowd's chaos. You are here to live aligned with virtue, with clarity, with reason. Because when you no longer move with the herd, you begin to move with truth. And that's when you become something far more unsettling. Not a rebel shouting from the outside, but a mirror standing quietly inside. A mirror that forces others to confront what they've been avoiding. And if that makes them uncomfortable, let it. Because your task was never to soothe the herd. Your task is to live free. Opening question. Have you ever been accused of something that made no sense? You offer help, and they say you're trying to control. You stay patient, and they claim you're hiding something. You give without expecting anything back, and they whisper you must have a hidden motive. And you're left thinking, Stoic frame. This is the ancient struggle between how we live and how others perceive us, not through truth, but through projection. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, when someone does wrong, it is because they believe it is right. Do not be angry. Show them a better way. But sometimes their wrong is not an action. It's a distorted lens, a way of seeing you not as you are, but as a reflection of their own wounds. Illustrative example. Consider Elias again. Known for his steady kindness, he was always the one who showed up when others disappeared. He never demanded recognition. Yet one day, a neighbor accused him of being fake. "No one is that nice without a reason," they said, and suspicion spread. Not because of what Elias did, but because people couldn't believe his goodness was genuine. They had never seen kindness without an agenda, so they assumed he must be hiding one. But Elias didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He understood what most people never learn. Reflection point. Think about that. If someone has used kindness as manipulation, they'll assume you do the same. If they've used silence as punishment, they'll interpret your silence as cruelty. If they've lived with betrayal, they'll see every closeness as a setup for pain. Their mind bends your truth into a shape that fits their past, and rather than heal, they project. Personal perspective. I've been there. I bet you have too. Times when someone twisted your sincerity into suspicion. At first you want to explain yourself, to prove your intentions. But here's what Stoicism teaches. You don't need to chase every misunderstanding. Because the more you try to convince someone who's determined to misread you, the more you give their distortion power over your peace. Deepening the lesson. Epictetus offered the antidote. If someone speaks ill of you, do not defend yourself. Simply live so that no one believes them. That's real freedom, not correcting every rumor, but living with such consistency that the truth shines through without you having to argue for it. It takes strength to resist the urge to explain yourself. But that strength is the mark of wisdom, because the clearer you become about who you are, the less you need others to see it. Application to daily life. So what do you do when others project their pain onto you? You let their arrows pass through. Their accusations are echoes of their past, not reflections of your truth. Your role is not to catch every arrow and prove it's not yours. Your role is to keep walking untangled, untangled from the need to be understood, untangled from the hunger to correct every false judgment. Practical wisdom. Ask yourself, am I spending more energy defending my character than living it? Because the Stoic path isn't about being untouched, it's about being untangled. Free from needing every person to see you rightly. Free from chasing after every distorted perception. And ironically, the less you defend yourself, the clearer the truth becomes. Because while words can be twisted, a life lived with integrity cannot. Closing the part, so when the whispers come, and they will remember this, people don't see you as you are. They see you as they are. And if your calm unsettles their chaos, if your kindness confuses their suspicion, if your honesty threatens their lies, let it. Because their projections are not your prison, your peace is not dependent on their perception. And real strength is not in forcing them to see you clearly. It's in knowing yourself so deeply that their fog no longer clouds your sky. So keep showing up, keep being steady, keep living aligned with virtue, because in the end, you don't need to prove who you are. Opening hook. What do you do when your kindness is twisted? When your patience is mistaken for weakness? When your silence is read as arrogance? When your care is labeled as control? The instinct is to defend yourself, to explain, to prove your heart is pure. But here's the truth. The more you try to convince others of your intentions, the more you give away your peace. Stoic frame. The Stoics had a different strategy. Conscious detachment. Marcus Aurelius said, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control." Think about that. You don't have to attend every argument. You don't have to pick up every misunderstanding. You don't even have to form an opinion about someone else's judgment of you. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about your own clarity not to hand it over to someone else's confusion. Illustrative example. Let me tell you about Dahlia. She worked in a high-pressure office where everyone fought to be seen and heard. Meetings were noisy, egos filled the room, and silence was rare. Dahlia was different. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, her words were careful, measured, and steady. Over time, her quiet presence became unsettling. One afternoon, a coworker snapped. "You use silence to control the room," they accused. "You're manipulative." Imagine that turning calm into manipulation. Most of us would panic, defend, plead. "That's not who I am." But Dahlia didn't flinch. She looked up and simply said, "What you see is yours to carry. What I am is mine to live." That was it. No long explanation, no desperate attempt to be understood. And that single line carried the wisdom of an entire philosophy. Reflection question: how often do we make the mistake of carrying what isn't ours? Someone misunderstands us, and suddenly we're restless, replaying conversations in our head, rehearsing defenses that will probably never be heard. But ask yourself, whose burden is this? Theirs or mine? Personal perspective. I've lived this struggle myself. Times when I couldn't sleep because someone questioned my motives. I thought if I just explained better, if I just proved myself, they'd see the truth. But over time, I realized truth doesn't need convincing. It needs consistency. And the moment you stop chasing other people's approval, you begin to reclaim your own peace. Deepening the lesson. Epictetus taught that suffering begins when we confuse what belongs to us with what does not. Your actions, your choices, your character that belongs to you. Their opinions, their projections, their suspicions that belongs to them. It's like standing in a storm. The winds whip around you, words flying like debris, accusations striking like hail. Detachment doesn't stop the storm. It roots you like a tree, steady and unmoved, refusing to sway with every gust. Application to daily life. So, how do you practice conscious detachment? Start small. When someone criticizes you unfairly, ask, is this about me or about them? When gossip circles back to you, remind yourself, I don't have to pick this up. When you're tempted to explain yourself endlessly, pause and breathe. Detachment doesn't mean silence in every situation. If someone shows you truth, accept it and grow. But if someone shows you projection, let it pass. Practical wisdom. Here's the paradox. The less you try to defend yourself, the more the truth reveals itself. Because explanations can be twisted, but a consistent life cannot. And when people finally see that your peace wasn't a mask, but a way of being, no accusation will stick. Closing the segment. So the next time someone misreads your kindness, don't scramble to prove yourself. Stand where you are. Remember, Marcus, you always own the option of having no opinion. You don't need to trouble your soul over someone else's lens. Because in the end, conscious detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's not indifference, it's strength. It's the decision to let others carry what belongs to them, while you keep carrying what belongs to you, your integrity, your peace, your truth. And that, my friend, is the first shield of Stoic practice. Opening hook. Let me ask you something. Have you ever given so much of yourself, your time, your patience, your energy, that at the end of the day, you felt drained, not fulfilled? You said yes when every part of you wanted to say no. You smiled to keep the peace, even though inside you felt uneasy. The world often tells us this is kindness, but the Stoics would say otherwise. Kindness without boundaries is not virtue, it's erosion. Stoic frame. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Boundaries are how you live that principle. They are the lines you draw to keep your actions rooted in what's right and true, not in what's demanded or expected. Without boundaries, your kindness becomes currency for others to spend. With boundaries, your kindness remains a choice, anchored in clarity. Illustrative example. Consider Aelius, a man known in his village for generosity. He lent money without interest. He forgave offenses without resentment. He gave his time freely to those in need. At first, people praised him. But over time, something shifted. Gratitude turned into expectation. His kindness was no longer a gift, it was treated as his duty. Then one day, a man asked Alias to lie for him, just once, in the name of loyalty. Alias could have bent. He could have told himself, "It's only one time, it will keep the peace." But he didn't. He calmly refused. He chose truth over approval. The man grew angry, spread rumors, and soon the village turned cold. But Alias didn't waver. "I would rather lose their approval," he said, "than lose my clarity." And in the long run, his stance spoke louder than any rumor. Reflection point. Now ask yourself, how many times have you said yes when you knew it wasn't right? How many times have you sacrificed your clarity for someone else's comfort? Was that really kindness, or was it fear of disappointing? Personal perspective. I've been there. Times when I thought giving more made me noble, but really it just made me exhausted. Times when I confused silence with compassion, when in truth, it was compliance. And the more I gave beyond my limits, the more I lost respect for myself, and ironically, the less others respected me too. That's when I learned the hard truth. Kindness without boundaries doesn't deepen love. It breeds resentment both in you and in them. Deepening the lesson. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They are gates that protect the integrity of what you let in. They communicate this simple truth. I give by choice, not by compulsion. I help from strength, not from fear. Seneca once reminded us, no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. Sometimes the adversity you must face is the discomfort of saying no. The frown on someone's face when you don't meet their expectation. The distance that comes when you refuse to bend your truth. But isn't that better than facing the slow erosion of your soul from 1,000 false yeses? Application to daily life. Here's how Stoic boundaries look in practice. When a friend asks for your time, but you're exhausted, you say no with honesty instead of yes with resentment. When a coworker pressures you to join gossip, you decline not rudely, but firmly. When someone asks you to compromise your values, you choose principle over peacekeeping. Boundaries don't mean you love less. They mean you love cleanly. They mean your kindness stays free of coercion. Practical wisdom. The paradox is this. When you define your edges clearly, your presence becomes more valuable, not less. At first, people may call you distant, cold, or arrogant. But over time, the truth reveals itself. The ones who only valued you when you were easy to use will fade. The ones who value your integrity will remain. So when you set a boundary and someone accuses you of being selfish, remember, Marcus, if it is not true, do not say it. We might add, if it violates your integrity, do not allow it. Closing the segment. So guard your soul the way a philosopher guards his reason. Say yes when it's true and no when it's right. Speak your boundaries without apology. Enforce them without anger. Let them come not from bitterness, but from wisdom. Because in the end, it's not your job to be endlessly available. It's your job to be authentically aligned. And when you lead with that kind of authority, quiet, firm, rooted, you'll discover that your kindness no longer depletes you. It replenishes you. That's the second shield of the Stoic. Boundaries forged not in anger, but in inner authority. Opening hook. How many times have you given something your help, your patience, your love, only to feel a sting when it wasn't acknowledged? You offered your best, but instead of gratitude, you received silence. And deep down, it hurt. Because whether we admit it or not, part of us still longs to be seen, to be appreciated. But here's the truth the Stoics knew well. If your kindness depends on being recognized, it isn't anchored in virtue, it's anchored in need. Stoic frame. Seneca once said, "He who gives quickly gives twice." But the wisdom runs deeper than speed. True giving is not about transaction. It's not about keeping a hidden ledger of who owes you what. Stoic giving flows from fullness, not emptiness, from principle, not performance. When you give and then release all expectation, That's when your kindness becomes unshakable. Illustrative example. Think of Lucilla. She lives simply in a bustling city, working long hours to care for her aging father. Every day she stopped by a bakery on her way home, and every day she brought food to a homeless man sitting outside. He doesn't even smile. Lucilla replied, "Because my kindness doesn't need his gratitude to be real. It only needs to be mine." That is Stoic giving. Quiet, steady, rooted not in what she received back, but in who she chose to be. Reflection question. Now think about your own life. How often do you give with a silent expectation? Maybe you do a favor for a friend and wait for recognition. Maybe you go the extra mile at work and feel slighted when no one notices. Be honest, are you truly giving, or are you bargaining for approval? Personal perspective. I've wrestled with this myself. There were times I thought my kindness was pure, but inside, I was still waiting for applause. And when it didn't come, I felt resentment. That's when I realized my giving wasn't rooted in virtue. It was rooted in emptiness. I was giving to fill a void, not to share what was already full. Deepening the lesson. This is why Stoic giving is so radical. It separates kindness from validation. If your kindness collapses when ignored, it was never anchored. If it hardens into bitterness when unappreciated, it was never free. True kindness is resilient because it doesn't need permission to exist. Epictetus urged us to examine our impressions to ask, what moves me? What hooks my attention? If recognition is the hook, then your kindness is conditional. But if principle is the anchor, then no reaction, good or bad, can shake it. Application to daily life. So how do you practice this? Here are 3 steps. A bull, check your source. Before you give, ask, am I giving from fullness or from need? If it's from need, pause. Replenish yourself first. Release the ledger. The moment you give, let it go. No keeping score. No quiet resentment. Redefine success. The success of kindness isn't measured by how it's received. It's measured by whether you stayed aligned with your values. Practical wisdom. Think about it. If no one ever thanked you again, would you still be kind? If your goodness was misunderstood every time, would it still be worth it? If the answer is yes, then your kindness is real. If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to look deeper, not at them, but at yourself. Because when you give without needing approval, you unlock a different kind of freedom. You stop chasing recognition, you stop resenting silence, and you discover the joy of acting purely from principle. Closing the segment. So, the next time you're tempted to give with strings attached, remember Lucilla. Give quickly, give freely, and most importantly, give without keeping score. Because in the end, Stoic compassion isn't about changing others. It's about refusing to let others change who you are. That is the 3rd shield of the Stoic. Kindness that doesn't need applause to remain strong. Opening hook. Have you ever noticed how simply not joining the crowd can make people uncomfortable? You don't laugh at what isn't funny. You don't complain when everyone else is venting. You don't nod just to blend in. And suddenly, you're labeled cold, arrogant, even too good for us. You just refuse to play along. Stoic frame. The Stoics warned us this would happen. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Why? Because real progress often looks strange to those who are still stuck. When you stop following the herd, you expose the unconscious rhythm they've been moving to. And people don't always thank you for that. They resent it. Illustrative example. Take Callus, for example. He worked in an office where people bonded over complaints. Every breakroom conversation was fueled by sarcasm, outrage, or gossip. Callus didn't join. He wasn't rude, he just listened quietly, did his work, and walked away when things turned bitter. Over time, whispers began. He thinks he's better than us. He's too quiet. He's judging us. But Callus never judged them. He simply chose not to add his voice to the noise. Yet to them, his stillness was an accusation. He didn't have to say a word. His silence spoke louder than their chorus. Reflection point, and that's the paradox. You don't need to oppose the herd to offend it. You only need to stop echoing it. When you don't conform, others feel confronted not by you, but by the contrast you represent. Ask yourself, how many times have you felt pressured to join in, not because you wanted to, but because standing apart felt too risky? Personal perspective, I know I have. There were times I laughed at jokes I didn't believe in, nodded at complaints I didn't agree with, just to avoid being singled out. And every time I walked away feeling smaller. Because the truth is, every false agreement is a quiet betrayal of yourself. The Stoics remind us that true strength is measured not by how many people cheer for you, but by how steady you remain when no one does. Deepening the lesson, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The approval of the multitude is a poor standard." Why? Because the multitude is often guided by impulse, not reason. If you measure yourself by the crowd, you'll always be pulled by the current of popularity. But if you measure yourself by principle, you'll be anchored, even when the crowd moves against you. When you choose reason over reaction, silence over gossip, principle over approval, you disrupt the unspoken rule, blend in at all costs. And suddenly, your calm presence becomes a quiet rebellion. Application to daily life. So how do you live unshaken by misjudgment? Expect misunderstanding. Progress always looks like arrogance to those unwilling to change. Don't be surprised when it comes. Value clarity over approval. Ask yourself, am I compromising my values just to be accepted? If the answer is yes, step back. Hold steady in silence. Sometimes the most powerful statement is refusing to join the noise. Practical wisdom. Remember Epictetus, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish. To the crowd, your restraint may look like weakness. Your calm may look like coldness. Your independence may look like pride. Let them think it. Their labels belong to them, not to you. Closing the segment. So, when others misunderstand you, when they call your silence arrogance or your steadiness pride, hold firm. You are not here to echo the herd. You are here to live by principle. And yes, it may cost you comfort. It may cost you acceptance. But in exchange, you gain something far greater. The freedom of living in alignment with yourself. Because in a world chasing applause, the one who can stand unshaken in silence has already won. That is the fourth shield of the Stoic. To live unmoved by misjudgment, rooted not in popularity, but in truth. Opening hook. What would it feel like to carry your kindness like a crown, not fragile, not conditional, not waiting for approval, but steady, sovereign, and completely yours? Most people give kindness like a bargain. I'll be good to you if you notice, if you return it, if you don't take advantage of me. But Stoic kindness is different. It isn't a negotiation. It's a declaration. Stoic frame. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Seneca added, "He who is brave is free." And Marcus Aurelius, in his morning meditations, reminded himself, when you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy. That's the root of sovereign kindness. It doesn't come from emptiness. It comes from fullness, an inner abundance that doesn't need recognition to be real. Like a lighthouse on the rocks, it shines whether anyone thanks it or not. Illustrative example. Take Elijah. For years he gave in order to be loved. He said yes when he wanted to say no. He smiled, even when disrespected. He gave more than he had, believing that if he just gave enough, people would finally stay, finally care. But the more he gave, the more they took. Not because they were evil, but because they sensed what he didn't. His kindness wasn't anchored. It was floating, tied to their approval. Then something shifted. Elijah stopped giving to be liked and started giving from principle. He began saying no, not with anger, but with calm clarity. Some people left, others grew upset, but for the first time in his life, Elijah felt peace, because his kindness finally belonged to him. Reflection point. How many times have you given not because you wanted to, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't? How many times have you let your kindness be borrowed by someone else's demands? And how would your life change if your kindness was no longer up for negotiation? Personal perspective. I've learned this lesson painfully. There were seasons when I confused kindness with approval seeking, when I thought being the good one would guarantee safety, loyalty, or love. But the more I tried to be everything to everyone, the less I recognized myself. Only when I started giving from principle, not fear, did I discover that real kindness doesn't shrink when misunderstood, it grows stronger. Deepening the lesson. That's the paradox of Stoic kindness. It is not weakness, it is sovereignty. Because once your kindness is rooted in self-mastery, no betrayal can corrupt it. No rejection can weaken it. No silence can erase it. Think of the lighthouse again. Surrounded by storms, battered by waves, but unmoved. Your kindness, when sovereign, is the same. Application to daily life. So how do you practice kindness as sovereignty? Anchor it in self-mastery. Remember Epictetus, no one is free who isn't master of themselves. Before giving to others, ask, am I giving from strength or from fear? Be brave enough to disappoint. Seneca reminds us, the brave are free. Sometimes bravery means letting people leave when your kindness no longer bends for them. Begin with gratitude. Like Marcus, start your mornings remembering the privilege of life itself. From that fullness, your kindness will flow not as duty, but as overflow. Practical wisdom. Here's the beauty. When you no longer give to be understood, you become untouchable. People may project, misjudge, even walk away. Let them. Because your kindness doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to you. And when it belongs to you, it becomes inexhaustible. Closing the segment. So let your kindness be like a lighthouse, steady, sovereign, shining not for applause, but because it is your nature. Say no when it protects your integrity. Say yes when it aligns with your values. Give not to prove you are good, but because you are already whole. Because the Stoics were right. Freedom isn't found in controlling how others see you. Freedom is found in mastering yourself. And the bravest act of all is to remain kind in a world that mistakes it for weakness. That is the fifth and final shield of the Stoic. Kindness is inner sovereignty, unyielding, unconditional, unshakable. Opening reflection. As we close, let's return to the heart of Stoicism. The Stoics never promised that living with integrity would make life easy. They never said people would always understand you, accept you, or applaud you. In fact, they warned us of the opposite. If you stop performing, if you stop people-pleasing, the world will resist. But here's the core truth: your duty is not to perform, not to appease, not to convince. Your duty is to live in alignment with what is right. The Stoic core. That means when you're misunderstood, you don't lash out. You hold your boundaries. When accusations come, you don't scramble to prove yourself. You answer with silence, silence that carries dignity. And when temptation arises to bend your standards just to fit in, you choose instead to stand firm in your own character. Because freedom, the only kind that matters, is not found in applause. It's not found in the herd's approval. Freedom is when you are no longer pulled by the strings of others' judgments. Your kindness becomes your compass. Your boundaries become your fortress. And your silence becomes your highest expression of self-respect. Anchoring with stories. Think of the voices we've walked with throughout this journey. Elias, steady in kindness, accused of being fake, only to reveal the truth about projection. Claire, who refused to wear the mask at work, showing integrity even when it made others uneasy. Julian, who woke up to a higher standard of living and faced resistance from those who clung to his old self. Theron, who wouldn't join in gossip, and for that, was treated as an outsider. Dahlia, who answered an unfair accusation with clarity. What you see is yours to carry. What I am is mine to live. Lucilla, who fed a stranger without needing thanks, proving kindness doesn't require applause. Alias, who chose truth over loyalty, refusing to lie even just once, protecting his clarity. Kalis, who didn't add his voice to the chorus of complaints, and so was labeled proud. Elijah, who finally stopped giving to be loved, and began giving from principle, finding peace and sovereignty. Each story reminds us, misunderstanding is not failure. Misjudgment is not the end. What matters is the integrity with which you keep walking your path. Stoic freedom. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Seneca added, "He who is brave is free." And Marcus Aurelius, in his daily meditation, reminded himself, when you wake up in the morning, remember the privilege it is to think, to enjoy, to love. That's real freedom. Not the freedom of being liked, but the freedom of self-mastery. The courage to be kind without being used. The bravery to be misunderstood without shrinking. The wisdom to keep shining not because the world deserves it, but because it is who you are. The final reminder. So remember this. You don't owe anyone your light, but you can still choose to shine. Not to be seen, not to be praised, but to remain true to yourself. That is the Stoic way. No performance, no people-pleasing, just quiet alignment with what is right. Call to action. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe if it feels right, not for numbers, but to keep walking this path together. And if you want to take a stand right now, drop 3 simple words in the comments. I choose clarity, because at the end of the day, clarity is freedom. And freedom is the reward of the Stoic life.